Disclosing the existence of non-human intelligence is no easy task. Many have tried and failed. But some managed to plant seeds of inspiration that would take root and forever alter the course of human history. Now the United States Congress is openly talking of recovered crafts, non-human intelligence.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself of non-human origin craft?
Yes, I personally interviewed those individuals.
And interdimensional beings.
Remember, we just now for the first time in history really had Congress have whistleblowers come forward credible that we're telling the entire world that there is something other than human life forms. Grush said that those were interdimensional beings. He refused to use extraterrestrial and alien.
But how did we get here? In order to tell the story of how we got here, we need to go back in time. We need to go back to the beginning. Today we will explore the unfolding disclosure of non-human intelligence through the lens of politics. Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book. The United States was very much interested in studying UFOs, but we now know from testimony given to Congress and the Inspector General of the intelligence community, secretly for generations, the United States has been engaging in something akin to the Manhattan Project. A project to reverse engineer recovered technological artifacts from a more advanced civilization. At the center of all of this is a technology, a form of propulsion so far in advance of anything we have ever known that even today, after all this time, we still cannot harness its full capability. Although we do not know the exact date that the reverse engineering program began, it was likely sometime in the first half of the 20th century. But questions still remain. Who are the mysterious beings who left behind these machines? And how on earth did we get their technology? After the disaster of the Soviet spy penetration of the Manhattan Project and living in a world still dominated by religious superstition, it's no wonder why such a unique program would follow a unique path. They would go underground. The program was moved into the custody of private military contractors and was eventually hidden under the veil of a special access program, but may have still been unofficially supervised by elements of the military and intelligence community. This allowed the program to exist beyond the reach of congressional and, in some cases, executive branch oversight, while also receiving an almost unlimited amount of funding.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Sightings had already been happening all over the world for some time, but in 1952, Washington, D.C. got its first taste of an up-close encounter with UFOs or UAPs. For years after these events, rumors of vehicles that could do the impossible proliferated in political circles and in the public.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve.
Leadership in Washington was becoming alarmed by this increase in sightings. In 1953, a high-level scientific committee was formed at the recommendation of the CIA in order to give guidance on this unprecedented problem. The committee, headed by mathematician and physicist Howard P. Robertson, would become known as the Robertson Panel. At this time, the Cold War had reached a grim new milestone. Just months before the committee convened, the first thermonuclear device was detonated. A heightened sense of national security and Cold War-era paranoia may have been weighing on the minds of leadership within the United States. In attendance for part of the meeting was Dr. J. Allen Hynek. At this point, Hynek was a scientific advisor to many of the Air Force UFO studies, including the newly formed Project Blue Book.
I was called into the meeting on Thursday. The panel members were seated around this table. It was a rather somber and impressive occasion, actually. I was a junior member, and I remember feeling considerably nervous and apprehensive about being in front of this powerhouse of scientists. But then for the past 4 years, I had been scientific advisor to the U.S. Air Force on this very problem. I came away from the meeting and from the room with the distinct feeling, however, that the panel had deliberately moved to debunk the whole subject and not to give it the serious scientific attention which it deserved.
The committee feared that public interest could be used as a form of psychological warfare and that reports of UFOs would swamp air defense systems. They moved to recommend a public education campaign be put in place to reduce public interest and that civilian UFO groups should be monitored. In the years after the committee, a dangerous new precedent would be set on how to handle concealing the truth of the UFO phenomenon. In the 1950s, as more and more sightings began to accumulate, civilian UFO research and activism groups began to form, with the most famous at the time being NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. In 1957, the organization was headed by the former United States Marine Corps Major Donald Keyhoe. That year, Keyhoe's old Naval Academy classmate would officially join NICAP's Board of Governors. Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter, the former director of the CIA.
We are being observed by some type of device which is ahead of us, far ahead of us, and is probably controlled by a highly advanced superior civilization. Now, this is a conclusion which I personally have stated and is shared by some members of our Board of Governors and advisors, not all of them. But it has reached to the point where many people in the Air Force have the same conclusion. In fact, the Air Force at one time had a top secret estimate that these things were interplanetary spaceships. So you will see that this, instead of being a subject for ridicule and a big joke, actually is a serious matter which could affect the lives of all of us.
As time went on, the sightings persisted, and along with it, stigma.
Well, you can look at here, look, beer bottles thrown. Look at my windshield. What would you think if somebody was throwing beer bottles at your house, stand out in the middle of the road screaming, you nut, you're fanatic and all that? What would you think?
Are you sorry now that you did tell people what you saw?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry because not that it's not the truth, but it's just the idea, the reaction of the people. They think you're a nut. Tell you the truth, that's just what they figure you are. And I'm not going to take it no more. I don't want nobody down in here. I just leave me alone. And if the thing lands right there by that pump, I'd never say a word. And he got out and talked to me. I wouldn't tell nobody. That's just the way I feel. I'm bitter and disgusted in the whole matter. And if people's going to act like that, I hope one lands right in Ann Arbor, right in the middle of Detroit.
In 1966, after a dramatic increase in UFO sightings, one congressman decided enough was enough. The issue now needed to be resolved. That congressman was Gerald R. Ford. Answering the pleas of the people, the future president would request a congressional investigation. In April of 1966, the first congressional hearing about unidentified flying objects was convened in Washington, D.C., before the House Armed Services Committee. Notable testimony included the Air Force Secretary Harold Brown and Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
We have not been hiding anything. The investigations have been made public. The explanations of those where there is a clear explanation have been made public. The hearing this morning was public for just that reason. In those cases where for lack of data or lack of a convincing hypothesis, the sighting has been kept in the unidentified category, we've been perfectly willing to say that too.
In the weeks after the hearing, succumbing to public pressures, the Air Force facilitated the creation and funding of a new scientific study to give answers to the public on what the UFO phenomenon was. The study, led by physicist Edward Condon, would become known as the Condon Committee. But elements of the Air Force were already involved with another scientific study, the reverse engineering program. The 1960s were a precarious time in the human story. The superpowers of the time were locked into a desperate struggle to see who would become the dominant force on planet Earth. With the world at stake, any breakthrough in reverse engineering these unconventional artifacts would require an unconventional level of secrecy. For that, the UFO mystery needed to be solved, and public engagement needed to end. This came to a head in 1969. Without being given access to any compelling data, the Condon Committee was forced to report, "Our general conclusion is that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge." In response to the committee's decision, Project Blue Book would permanently close down, citing that further funding cannot be justified either on the grounds of national security or in the interest of science. One last congressional hearing would happen that same year, but would make no progress towards revealing the truth. Engaging with the public on the UFO problem was now over. If the United States did not address the issue openly, then the people would eventually forget and move on with their lives. The reverse engineering program would now have precious time to learn how the technology works. And the stakes could not be higher. Why? Because the United States is not the only nation studying non-human technology.
Тем, кто позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России, хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО.
In the decades after 1969, public UFO fervor would eventually subside and merge into science fiction and fringe conspiracy theory. While in the halls of power, the UFO topic would fade into legend, occasionally resurfacing, but never able to break the bonds of stigma. That is, until one curious senator came along and changed everything.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
We as a country are certainly not doing what we should do. This is an area that is important to not only our country, but to the world. And I know that other countries are doing more than we're doing. And I think that that's not good.